What's going on, everybody? This is Josh McCabe here. I'm your host on the Overflow Beyond the Music podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today, wherever you are listening, whether it be online, in the car, on your computer, on your mobile device, whatever time it is, morning, evening, afternoon, whatever it might be. Just thank you for tuning in. The Overflow Beyond the Music is the name of this podcast, and we love to dive deep into the lives of artists and songwriters and musicians to learn about how their faith and their journey has influenced them along the way as their journey as musicians and as people. And today's subject that we're going to be addressing over the next couple episodes is something that's personal for me. It's something that's dear to my heart and something that I truthfully don't think is talked about enough. When I began pitching the idea of doing an episode around the idea of mental health, I asked a few friends who I knew had been on a journey in the music industry, some in the Christian industry and some in the mainstream. And I talked about doing this and giving Christian artists a voice to talk about their own journey. And I was met with some response that surprised me. And I said, is anybody talking about this stuff in the industry? And a lot of the responses I got were no, it's taboo to talk about this. And that's a major problem. That is a major issue when artists don't feel like they can talk about what they're battling, whether it be anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, eating disorders, whatever that may include. We got to come alongside artists and give them a voice. And this is what I want this podcast to be. This is not going to be tips on how to deal with your own struggle. This is going to be giving artists a voice to share their story. And I'm just praying that as we do that, that you would be encouraged and maybe you find yourself in some of these stories that you're going to hear in some of this journey. And I know you're going to be really encouraged today. I believe you're going to be encouraged. That's why we're doing this, so that you would know that you're not alone in your journey. And we've got some incredible guests today, and I cannot wait to dive into it. And this is my very first podcast episode from a brand new city and a brand new country. I recently moved from Canada to Nashville, Tennessee, and currently I'm sitting in a bedroom right now with not much unpacked. I've got a little desk here. I've got my microphone out. That's all I need to be able to talk to you guys today. And in just a couple minutes, we're going to get to our guests. But first of all, I have a few little housekeeping items to get into. If you are on Instagram, you're going to want to give us a follow. We are at the Overflow BTM. That's right, the Overflow BTM. Make sure that you go give us a follow and say what's up. We'll make sure to hit you back. It's going to be where you can find out all about the upcoming episodes on the Overflow Beyond the Music podcast. Well, as I was building this episode for the subject around mental health and mental health struggles, especially as I was talking to so many musicians, I was realizing that there was so much more going on that wasn't being written about in songs, or maybe it wasn't being talked about in detail. And as I started thinking about building this episode, which is turned into 2, maybe 3 episodes, there was one person that I thought I have to bring them on, because not only would I say they're an expert in this area, though he probably wouldn't say it, but when you have schools calling you all the time to come address issues and being flown across the country all the time to speak on this, you are an expert in my books. And this man helped me through a lot of my personal journey and became one of the first people I felt like understood what I was going through. And I'm going to share more about my journey in the next episode. But I want to welcome my good friend Brett Allman to the podcast. Brett, thanks for hanging out with us.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Josh.
Yeah, it's an honor. And I want to just say I want to thank you for being a voice to these issues and to some of these subjects before it really became the I don't want to say the cool thing to talk about, but it definitely has become something that people are talking about a lot more. And I would never, ever want this subject to be a fad or something that we capitalize on in media or in society. But this is something that's really close to your heart.
No, it is. Probably of all the topics I speak on, this is the closest one to me, for sure.
And when did that passion really start for you? Because I think everyone could say there was a time when they noticed that something wasn't right with the world, and they were experiencing and seeing things that didn't sit well, and they decided to do something about it. When was that moment for you?
I've been speaking for 23 years, and so I began talking on music and media, just the old kind of debates of Christian music good, secular music bad. I mean, this is 23 years ago, right? So
yeah,
I'm dating myself, but after years of talking about music, there probably wasn't a night when someone didn't come up and ask me a question to do with. Now, it's funny, at that point, we didn't usually call it mental health. It was more conversations on depression, eating disorders, lots of conversations on cutting, which is funny because fast forward to today, we don't usually use those terms as specifically. We kind of just use the greater umbrella of just mental health, mental illness.
Yeah, why do you think that is? Why do you think that we've stopped talking about the specifics and created almost a more general umbrella topic?
That's a good question. I know for some of them, like for topics like cutting, I think it's very triggering for people. I've traveled a youth circuit for years, and any of the speakers who would, I'd be at a youth workers conference, and people would put up pictures of what kids have carved into their arms and stuff. And I'm always like, you're making an assumption that people, just because we're adults or just because we're youth workers or youth leaders, that we don't struggle with these things. And so it's like, we don't need to trigger someone to have a conversation on it. Like, being graphic for the sake of being graphic you don't need it. But I do think also that we've realized that a lot of these things are, I think mental health is the greater conversation. And then we look at how we struggle under that could be many things, whether it's anxiety, depression, panic attacks, whether it's, I mean, you could go everything from dyslexia to OCD to PTSD, schizophrenia, bipolar. And then you have the kind of the ways sometimes people struggle. So everything from eating disorders, anorexia, bulimia, binge eating, cutting. Never forget things like cutting. Like self-harm is just hurting yourself to get beyond an overwhelming feeling, thought, and emotion. But people do that for other ways as well. Some people, it could be pornography, it could be gambling, it could be drinking. So I think we've, years ago, we looked at it very specifically, but we have to look at it. Mm-hmm. Everyone's so unique. We have to kind of do that like 10,000 feet up look and say, okay, what could the issues be? But let's look at it from high up, not just the specific thing of why is someone cutting or why is someone struggling? Well, it could be many reasons. So let's get to those reasons, not just trying to address just the specifics of what someone's actually struggling with.
Well, one of the things I've noticed that I think I've traveled enough. I wouldn't say I'm the most well-traveled musician. There's probably a lot more well-known musicians who are much more traveled and accomplished than I am. But the pastor side of me gets into some conversations with musicians that you usually didn't intend or didn't think would be happening. And I'm noticing a pattern that maybe the issue in some of the musicians or artists that we've encountered, even being Christians, has been around something that you've experienced yourself, something that I've experienced, but this issue of burnout and breakdown or anxiety or panic attacks. And I wonder if you could share a little bit about your journey and sort of how that might relate to some of the conversations or encounters you've had with artists and musicians along the way that can relate to some of the stuff you've experienced.
For sure. So it's funny, like I spend my life on the road with musicians. I'm just the other side of that coin where I come into an event and I'm the speaker as opposed to being the musician. Right. So my history is I was a teacher. I taught for 10 years with the Toronto District School Board, where I live I live just outside of Toronto. And I left that and I did a number of things. I did a program called the Aero Leadership Program and then went straight into a master's degree down at Wheaton Grad School down in Chicago. But suddenly I'm an international student. And so suddenly I need to make up the money it costs, and even just for a master's degree. So my speaking dates went from 100, 125 a year to between 275 and 300 a year, which is just ludicrous. Not the musician, the word, right? It's just crazy. I mean, I remember once speaking 32 times in 14 days.
That's unbelievable.
Like I would do a morning session, maybe I'd even do like an early morning session, then head to another school and do like 11 o'clock and then afternoon, then evening. But in my head, all I could say is, you know what? I know I'm really crazy busy and I'm exhausted and I'm unsustainable, but I can pay for food when I go away or I paid for my books. And so it's this season I found myself in, trapped. You know, my board, my wife, I'm married with 2 kids. Like, everyone would just say to me, listen, you're doing too much. And I remember just saying to everyone the same line over and over again, March 1st, 2012. Because if I can just reach that, that was the day I'd graduate. And that would be the day that I would just say rejig my life, right? I don't have a master's degree anymore. I could be a better father, better husband, just be a better Christian. Like, just everything else could go back to normality.
Was there any part of you that, as you're saying that, March 1st is when I can rejig, that in the back of your head, you're thinking, probably not?
Well, I began, even in the last 6 months of my master's degree, you know, it's kind of like when you do a long tour or something, at the end, you begin to kind of separate from the tour before you're even done.
Interesting, yeah.
And so, like, I was in my last class and I began to not be well. Like, I just wasn't sleeping well. But then like, the day I graduated is the day I stopped sleeping. And I have not actually slept through the night since March 1st, 2012. I'm up every sleep cycle, every night.
Wow.
And so I began, like, I came off my master's, but I'm still speaking. And so I found myself suddenly having these weird instances, I don't even know what to call it, weird occurrences. So I was in front of like 400 or 500 students at a church, and you know, as a speaker, I'm kind of wandering around the front with my, you know, head cordless mic on me, and I went from being normal to unwell within a second, and it was like the world turned sideways.
Wow.
And you know, like, I mean, everybody who's ever been at the front knows this. In the front of your head, you're doing what you're doing, right? You're singing, you're playing, you're doing whatever you need to. But in the back of your head, you're thinking over things. What am I going to have for dinner after I'm done? Or, you know, like you're just thinking stuff. And so the back of my head was, how do I gracefully pass out in front of people? And so I remember, like, I'm thinking, like, I'm 6'6". It's like, do I just fall like a tree? Do I go down to one knee? And I somehow kind of got through the talk. And at the end, I actually took a break in the middle of it and then finished. But I went home and I went to my family doctor, and he said, oh, you have anxiety. And I corrected him. I said, no, I speak on anxiety. And he said, no, you have anxiety. It was this kind of weird banter back and forth. And he put me on some meds. I didn't even care what they were at the time. And I went home and I was sort of okay again. So I went back on the road. I was doing a tour of 10 or 12 Catholic high schools. And on the second day of the tour, I found myself crying in my car at 8 a.m.
Wow.
And I remember just kind of going, I'm not okay. Like, I'm still rational in the head, but I'm like, why am I weeping? Like, there's nothing going on. So I went home, back to the doctor. Now I got sleep clinics involved. And then I was speaking out I was at a camp in Alberta, and I had my first panic attack, which I didn't realize. So panic attack is fight or flight. So like 1,200 people came to hear me speak, and I had a horrible night's sleep. I had a horrible flight. The whole trip was horrible getting there, just feeling horrible. And I got up in the morning and, like, fight or flight, I fled.
Wow.
I hopped in my car and I drove away, knowing full well that I'm leaving people, which is my job, right? That's my job, is to speak and to engage. And then I went home, and then I was okay. And then it all came to head. I was at a camp called Lakeshore Pentecostal Camp, just like a camp, faith-based camp. And I was supposed to be doing some speaking, and my wife and family were going to be there. And I went boating for the day with a buddy of mine and his family. We were eating dinner at McDonald's with our kids afterwards. And when I came out, my life changed. Like, it's funny for me because I have a moment. That was my moment. Wow. I thought, you know, when you come out of a McDonald's, you kind of walk through the drive-through, you know, like
yeah.
So I thought I was just kind of past that, and I thought, I'm being hit by a car. And then I realized I'm not being hit by a car. I'm actually falling into a car. Like, my equilibrium is just shot. And I kind of called for my wife, and she grabbed my arm, walked me to the car. I think it was the first time I ever didn't drive. And my wife drove me back to the cottage. And then I realized that I couldn't leave the cottage. I learned the next morning, like, I kind of went to bed just thinking I was sick. And the next morning we all left for breakfast. And you eat breakfast in some big place with everybody. And I got 2 cottages down, and my hands would shake, and I kind of let them go. And for hours I would try to leave. And every time I would get a few cottages down, my hands would shake and my blood pressure would rise, and I'd break out in goosebumps and a sweat. And I didn't leave the cottage for the week. And then I went home and didn't work for almost a year.
Wow.
And there's irony to my journey in that I'm a speaker who to this day speaks on mental health, and I still struggle. Like, I've sat for every talk I've ever done since then. And I still struggle with sleep, and I still struggle with anxiety. Depression's a bit better. Like, after being at home for 5 months, depression set in, and they're linked, but they're different. In my mind, they were different, and I know sometimes we have a hard time separating the two of them. But I'm back to work. I've been working now for 6 years, and I travel a good docket. I'm about 125 to 150 dates a year, and a lot of it's local too. So I'm not on the road that many dates, but yeah, that's kind of my journey.
Well, after going through something like that, there's probably a lot of follow-up that takes place. You know, friends and family wanting to know what's going on. Are you okay? Dates getting canceled. A lot of questions being asked. Where's Brett? What's going on with Brett? And I guess my question is, how did you deal with some of the aftermath of an experience like that? And how did you embrace it and just say, you know what, this is my journey and it's time to move forward?
Like, I remember sitting at home and people would come through my house, and I don't want to call them Job's friends because people might hear this. But like, people come through, and I try to give people the benefit of the doubt, and they would say, "Have you tried?" And then what they'll add in. Like, the biggest one people always said to me is, "Well, have you tried Jesus?"
Yeah.
And I would say to them, "What do you mean by that?" And they're like, "Well, Jesus." And I'm like, "I know Jesus. What do you mean by have I tried Jesus?" And they would kind of just look at me and say, "Isn't that what I'm supposed to say to you?" And I would say, "I actually don't know anymore." And then they would leave.
Wow.
And then people would say, "Have you tried, these specialty milkshakes with lots of vitamins and minerals? Or have you tried running? Or have you tried..." And it's just, every one of them offered up something. And so I get that people don't know what to do in these moments.
Yeah.
But they all left, and I sat.
Wow.
And I'm suddenly just at home trying to figure this out. And I think my pride and everything, and ego, I'm a speaker, and I'm a dad, and I'm a type A personality. And suddenly I can't even leave my home.
Yeah.
And so it took me a bit of time before I just this is my journey. And I just had to kind of own it. And what blew my mind was because I travel like any other artist, I got lots of social media people, right? And so people would post online like, "Oh, you cancel, like, what's going on?" Or, someone then like post on my Facebook wall, "Praying for you, here you're having some struggles." And so I just decided one day to post, and I just kind of posted, "This is what's going on. I'm not able to work, and I don't understand, and here's what's going on." And you get lots of people like it, and they heart it, and they say some line praying for you. But I was overwhelmed with the people who wrote me privately, just saying, "This is my journey as well." And this is what I get every single night when I speak. I have a talk called The Walking Wounded, and it's just people just on a nightly basis just say, "This is what I do, and this is my life, and I have the same journey as you. I don't sleep. I struggle with anxiety. I have panic attacks on stage." And it's just interesting. It's in some ways it's comforting just to know that you're not alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to ask you this question too, because we're going to have some artist guests on some of these episodes talking about some of their journey. But I loved what Brian Johnson said in his book and in our interview, that he went in his panic attack, he went to go worship, and it wasn't working for him. And I'm curious, how did music play a role in your journey of your battle and the panic and the breakdown and the anxiety? How did music play a role for you?
So I have the biggest music collection, I thought, of anyone. I had 7,000 albums, CDs, downloads, all legal. I had 2 8-tracks as well for anybody who's a bit older.
Perfect.
Then I subscribed to Apple Music. I actually have Apple Music and Spotify. So I have 42 million songs that I now own. I love music. But it's interesting it's very almost similar to even my scripture reading when I'm at home. So I'm at home and I'm not working. And people would say, "Are you reading the Gospels?" And I'm like, "I'm actually reading Old Testament prophets."
Yeah.
Like Amos, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes. It's funny when you're not well, what you enjoy. And even for music, people would send me, what's that song by Casting Crowns? Something in the Storm?
Yeah.
And they'd send me that, and I'm like, it's just too, sometimes with our music, it's just kind of I really, it's kind of everything was really bad, and then I looked to Jesus and everything was fine. It's this is not my world right now. So there were musicians that I sort of seeked out who used language that I understood.
Right.
And so someone like a Plum.
Yeah.
I'm just trying. That's funny. It's been a while since I've had to go through these music, but there's these different artists with different language. Matt Maher has a song where he talks about, I woke up in darkness, surrounded by silence. Oh, where have I gone? It's interesting. Like, I actually couldn't get past that line for a good year and a bit. And I think this comes down to too is how we journey, in that we all journey different. Meaning, for some people who go through these journeys, they lean back on their faith. And one guy said to me, it's like Jesus met me in the clouds.
Yeah.
And so for them, it might mean just like you throw in a Bethel or whatever music, a worship album, and it's just perfect for you. Mine has been the darkest journey I've ever had in my life. And so for me, it's music that I've always kind of yearned for, is anything that connects. So I'm listening to like an old Our Lady Peace album.
Yeah.
Gravity. Like just anything that talks about challenge, right? Anything that just wasn't just kind of everything's fine. And so for me, that was kind of the bigger stuff, is listening to music that actually connected with who I am. Even I got like a band like Linkin Park, I connected with a lot, just some of the more darkness in some of their music.
Well, I want to ask you as well, because something that really helped me was praise and worship music in my journey, and just having worship on all the time. But not everybody, I guess, connects with it in the same way. What was it like for you? Because it was something that worked for me,
Yeah. I think for me too, what's interesting is a lot of the quote unquote praise and worship music I struggled with listening to, because how do I say this? I didn't feel God anymore, just to be honest.
Yeah.
It's funny. I remember sitting down with my counselor, and this took a lot. Like, I run a national ministry, and I kind of took a big breath, and I said, I don't feel God anymore. And the response was kind of nothing. And I said, did you hear me? I said, I don't feel God anymore. And it was kind of like, yeah. And I said, can you look at me? Like, I just told you I don't feel, and I was interrupted, and she said to me, something along the lines of, you're depressed, right? And I said, yeah. And she said, do you connect with your wife in that like feeling way? And I said, no. Your kids? No. Friends? No. Anyone? No. And then she said to me, you're okay. And I think I cried. It was the first time someone just said to me, you're okay.
Yeah.
Because here's the problem. We live in this world of feelings, right? Like, especially with music, right? It's this like music. I just love how it makes me feel. But suddenly in my faith, I'm dead. My feelings are shot. They're either, I'm either crying or I feel nothing, right? It's this numbness back and forth. But just to be told that you're okay, it's kind of like there's me, a brick wall, and God. But what's funny with this is that none of us have ever said, oh, I have a feeling in God. What we say is that I have a faith in God. But then your feeling is gone, and you suddenly now question your faith, which is the definition of faith. So I came home and I told my wife what I told my counselor, and she said to me, should you still be speaking anymore? Which is something only your wife would ever say to you. And I went for a walk, and I did some other things, and I emailed some people, and I came across a verse by John Ortenberg who says, you're known by your fruits, you're not known by your feelings.
Wow.
So I'm at speaking dates, and I'm just trying to get through. Like, It's not that I'm there and I'm like, oh, Jesus, work through me. I'm just trying to survive and not have a panic attack.
Right.
And he says, you're known by your fruits, not by your feelings. So I wrote all these people, and I said, are you still seeing good stuff? Like, are people getting closer to Jesus? Are they dealing with addictions and mental health and marriages and all these things? And everybody said, yeah. And so for me, it was a little freeing just to know that, okay, I might not have this feeling in the moment, but God is still God, and I'm seeing good fruits, which means I'm still doing what I think is the right stuff. And so it kind of just freed me to kind of continue during that journey and to keep working during the kind of stages of my journey as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to ask you this just as we close this segment. What would you say to, and this podcast is, though we have primarily artists and musicians as guests, we really want this to speak to everybody, but what would you say to not only fans or listeners of artists, but also to artists themselves that might be experiencing some of this and not really sure what to do?
If you're wondering, like if you think you might have some anxiety, or if you think you might be depressed, you probably have crossed that line. Like, no one's ever just been having a really great night after a show and said, oh, I wonder if I'm depressed. Like, it doesn't happen. Like, so if there's something going on, I would just say, be honest about it and just get some counsel, right? So go sit down with like a counselor. Like people always say counseling's for the weak. And I'm always like, no, counseling's for the strong. Like, doesn't matter who we are. We can all get marriage counseling. We can all get counseling, personal, like spiritual formation stuff. But we can also get counseling just to help us, right? If we're struggling. And I think we all should be going to the doctor. We all should be eating better and doing all these things. But in those moments, if you're not well, go get some counsel, and then don't journey on your own.
Yeah. It's
okay to not, like Perry Noble says this, right? It's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
It's just not okay to stay that way.
Man, that's great truth. And I appreciate just your insight on this. We are going to hear from some artists today. But hey, Brett, would you stick around to the end of the show and give us some great resources we close out? Is that all right?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks.
All right, perfect.
Thank you for the world that awakes in the dawning light that breaks, and for the sunlight kissing my face. Thank you. And for the stars out on...
Well, as we began building a framework for this podcast and trying to figure out exactly who we were going to talk to, what some of the subject matter was going to be around the area of mental health, one of the names that just kept coming up was Jason Gray. And I'd never met Jason. I've never had the chance to speak with him before, but we caught up and had a chance to have just an incredible discussion around some of his journey. And I began our conversation by asking him to tell me about some of his journey in the area of mental health.
Well, I'll say that I've always felt things very deeply, and that is a gift, and it's also a burden to manage. So I've struggled with depression most of my life. Sometimes I've been able to manage it through counseling.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I've been able to manage it through meds.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting story about that. I'm not against meds at all. In fact,
right.
I think they can be very, very helpful. My preference is to not be completely dependent on meds for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some practical reasons for that. But I've gone on meds before when I was so depressed that my brain was a cloud, and I didn't have clarity. I couldn't think clearly, So so I went on prescription meds for a season to help me to begin to think straight again, and it did give me clarity for a while. And then after I was on it a while, then I felt like I was in this other kind of fog, and then I came off the meds for clarity again, So moving in and out of that, and recognizing when it was a good idea to go on the meds and then also to come off. I've had to navigate all of that. Building up strong Christian community around me has been instrumental as well.
Yeah, of course.
And as a songwriter, when I was on the meds, it would take the edge off the lows, but it would also take them off the highs, So it kind of muted all of my feelings,
right?
Which I need that.
Yeah, of course.
Or I should say, I need my feelings as a songwriter,
Right.
So that's why I prefer to be off the meds, and as much as I'm able to, I like to feel everything, So my journey with all of it has been about learning how to make peace with it and make good use of it, and also recognizing when I need help.
Yeah, and I mean, I love hearing about your journey, and especially what I found interesting was you talking about songwriting and how medication affected that. How has your journey impacted other areas of your life, or the way you even see and view the world?
I'm thinking of a story that I heard from Brennan Manning years ago. It's a story of a doctor who went to this healing pool to be healed of his gloom and his sadness and melancholy. And when he went to go under the water, the angel came and stopped him and said, "No, this healing is not for you." And he said, but you don't understand. How can I live this way, And the angel said, without your wounds, where would your power be?
Wow.
It is your melancholy that makes your low voice tremble in the hearts of men and women. The very angels themselves cannot persuade the wretched and bumbling children of earth, as can one human being broken on the wheels of living. In love's service, only wounded soldiers can serve. I believe that,
Wow, yeah.
The burden of feeling everything is obvious. The gift of it, though, is it has made me a very empathetic, very compassionate person.
Yeah, of course.
And I wouldn't trade that for anything, It's a gift for sure. So,
yeah, it's amazing how our journey can give us compassion for other people and what they're going through. And I've had the opportunity to read up a little bit and hear some interviews and hear you talk a little bit about your journey. But I'm curious, when did you first start realizing that something just wasn't quite right in what you were dealing with and feeling and experiencing?
Well, for me, it's always been kind of clear. One of the clues, I suppose, is I remember very often going through seasons where when I'd hear on the news of a celebrity who has passed away, and they passed away young,
Yeah.
I'd think, oh, they're so lucky.
Oh, man, wow.
That's usually a sign.
Wow.
Ooh, things are getting dark around here, But also being lethargic and
Yeah.
a general kind of malaise. But also, I had this interesting experience. I love reading. And I would always be reading like 2 or 3 books at a time. And then I went through a prolonged season of stress and depression, and began to realize that I couldn't read anymore. Like I couldn't track with what I was reading.
Wow.
And I didn't know what was going on. I was grateful to learn that people who go through prolonged stress and depression, what can happen is their hippocampus shrinks and their amygdala grows,
Okay.
And so I was grateful to understand what was going on in my body, and that I wasn't crazy. Like I actually wasn't able to read anymore,
Wow.
I've since learned that you can heal from that. The hippocampus will grow, Unfortunately, I guess the amygdala will not reduce, so you will have a heightened sensitivity to fear and anxiety that you'll have to learn how to manage,
Wow.
So that's kind of a drag, but
Yeah.
it is also a good reminder of how important it is to do the best that you can to manage your mental health, and to recognize when you need help, what kind of help you might need,
Yeah.
so you can reduce those kinds of changes happening in your body.
Well, I want to ask you, because as you talk about reaching out for help or seeking some help and guidance in this journey to deal with some of the things you're facing emotionally, I've talked to a lot of people who have been reluctant to reach out for help because they're scared, they don't want to look weak, they are embarrassed, or however that looks. But for you, who was the first person that you talked to about some of the things you were feeling, and who was the first person you really reached out to and said, all right, here's what's going on, here's the unedited, unfiltered version of what I'm dealing with?
I'm pretty open, I mean, I wrote a song about looking for a length of rope that I wanted to hang at the end of my hope, which was about a night when I wanted to end my life, and wrote a song about it instead, and that was a song that thousands of people have heard, so in a lot of ways I'm pretty open about it. In other ways I'm not, I rarely talk with people when I'm right in the middle of a depressive episode, mostly because I don't want to be a burden to anybody. I'm always afraid of that, But I think my friends would want to know, and they would prefer to know over a more tragic alternative, One time that I did open up was a few years ago. I was on tour with Josh Wilson, and he's an amazing artist if you've never heard him, and a good man and a great friend. And we were on the road, and he asked me how I was doing, and I told him the truth. I was really, really struggling at that time. I couldn't see a reason to live. I had just come through my divorce.
Wow.
Wasn't seeing my kids. It was just a dark, dark time. Now, there is a counseling ministry in Nashville.
Okay.
A counselor named Al Andrews that artists go and see, and he's great. He's so great that he's usually booked up way in advance, So Josh happened to have an appointment with him in a few days, and he said, "I want you to come with me." And so he got me in to see Al, and he and Al kind of walked me through what I was feeling and turned things around for me in that day, So thank God for Josh Wilson, because I was in a dark spot, and thank God also for Al Andrews.
Man, that's amazing. When you can have friends there that are there for you, not only when things are going well, but when it's dark, in the dark times,
Yeah. So if I've had friends tell me over and over, like, if you're really struggling, call me, middle of the night, whenever it is.
Right.
And so for anyone who might be hearing this, you may be afraid of being an imposition. And I completely understand that. And I mean, like me, I don't want to be a drama queen or all that kind of stuff. But I think that our friends would say that is worth so much more than the alternative, So make the call. Do what you got to do to get through the dark night of your soul.
Yeah, and when you're in those dark nights and dealing with all that stuff, there's all these feelings that probably come out, whether it be of sadness or frustration or anxiety or even anger. And how have you learned to process and deal with some of those feelings in some of the seasons you've walked through and some of the stuff that you've had to face down?
I'll talk about anger for a moment here. After I went through my divorce, I was sad, I was heartbroken, I was confused, disappointed with God, but I was also I was really angry with God, because I had prayed for a different story, and I felt like he didn't come through. And so I was angry with him. The problem was I didn't feel like I was allowed to be angry with God. I felt like, is that arrogant or presumptuous or theologically allowed,
Right.
So I had all this anger, but I didn't feel like I could bring it to God. So what did that mean? It meant it interrupted our intimacy because I could no longer bring my heart to God, And that was when I began to realize what an intimate thing anger is, I saw it in my own relationship with my son. There was a season where he was angry with me, but for whatever reason, he didn't feel like he could talk with me about it, but it was always in the room there between us. And I just wanted him to talk with me about it, but he wouldn't.
Right.
Until the day that he finally did. And when he did, man, he let me have it. And he cussed me out, and he said some hard things that were hurtful. Some of them I didn't think were fair or accurate or true, But I remember the words of my mentor, and he had told me years earlier that, in a moment like that, when a person is angry with you, the best thing you can say is, "Tell me more."
Wow.
and keep them talking
Yeah.
with you, because the more they do that, the more they will bring their heart to you again, And you can waste that moment if you want to by defending yourself or correcting them, or you can listen and recognize what's really happening, which is that the person is bringing their heart to you, and the more you give them a safe place to do that, and a safe place to actually talk, to speak what's on their mind, what's on their heart, the more they speak, the more accurate they will become anyway, It's always overheated and exaggerated at first, But so I got to have a moment like that with my son, and told him, tell me more. And he let me have it, and it healed something between us. Then we had intimacy again, and that was when I realized, I think this is what I need to do with my Heavenly Father, And so I spent a season where I just kind of had it out with him and expressed all that anger.
Yeah.
And it restored intimacy between me and the Lord, and it healed a lot of things in my life,
Yeah, that's great.
So I believe health looks like this, that we feel our feelings and then we give it to God. We feel our feelings, we don't judge our feelings, we don't try to manage our feelings, but we actually feel them, and then we give them to God.
Right. That's incredible insight just about dealing with our feelings and with our emotions, because they're real, and we don't want to dismiss them. But how is coping with some of these feelings and some of these battles and struggles looked for you practically, or even just in your own heart, or even managing your own emotions?
Gosh, a lot of it has been about just making peace with it,
Right.
I said at the beginning that I've always been very sensitive. Now, in years past, I might have used the words too sensitive, but I don't use that language anymore, because I don't think that I'm too sensitive.
Yeah.
If I were to say that, I'd be making a judgment, So a lot of it is about learning how to live in non-judgment of myself as well as others, and to accept that this is how God made me,
Right.
And it can be used, I've been thinking a lot about how inclined we are to always only want to bring God our gifts and our strengths,
Right.
Here, Lord, I'm good at songwriting. Here, use this. I hope I'm good at songwriting. Anyway. Would be an example, or I'm good at leadership or organizing or whatever your gift may be. But more and more, I've been thinking about how important it is to bring our weakness and our brokenness to Him too, because He'll use that as much, if not more, than anything else. An example I like to give is I'm insecure, and I'm a people pleaser. And all my life I've been embarrassed about these things. I've wished I could eradicate them from my life, but they don't seem to be going anywhere. It's gotten easier to manage as I've gotten older, but it's still there. And I used to hate these things about me, but recently I began to recognize how very useful they are. For instance, when I'm standing in a concert hall and I'm doing a concert, because I'm insecure, because I'm a people pleaser, I'm tuned into the room, and I can feel what's happening in the room. I can feel if I'm losing people's attention, and then I know, okay, I need to insert a joke here, or I need to do something to draw them back in.
Yeah, I get that.
And if I were more secure, and if I didn't care how others felt about me, I wouldn't be tuned into the room that way, I'd probably be a boring performer. So my insecurity and my people pleasing really serves me well in a moment like that, and it makes me better at what I do. And we all have these gifts we all have these weaknesses that that can be a gift as well.
Yeah.
Another one of my weaknesses that I now see as a gift is my melancholy and my emotional makeup that makes me very sensitive. And it can be challenging at times, but it's also so rich. It's so rich, and the way that it tunes me into the world.
Yeah.
And our hope is not an inflated hope. It's a very real, authentic, durable hope, which means that when we speak about hope, it's backed by this conviction that comes from being tuned into reality in a particular way, you know. So how do I cope with it? By accepting it as a gift, as the gift that it is, and by daily praying and acting out the grace that helps keep me from being overthrown by it.
Wow, what a huge thank you to Jason Gray. Really appreciate you coming on. I really appreciate your vulnerability, for just your raw honesty and sharing your story with us. Thank you so much, Jason, for being on the podcast. Well, I'm so excited to be able to chat with our next guest here because her name's Lacey Sturm, and many of you know her as the former singer of Flyleaf. She's now a solo artist, but she's also going to be heading out on tour with Skillet coming up, filling in for Jen Ledger for a couple shows that are taking place in the very near future. But the thing I love about Lacey is that Lacey's never been afraid to share her testimony. She's just been so open and vulnerable and honest about her struggle with suicide and the suicidal thoughts that she had, and the day that Jesus really stepped in and changed everything and saved her life. And when we were piecing this interview together, this is part of a much larger conversation that Lacey and I had that we will make available for you guys later on. But I definitely wanted to take some aspects of our conversation and apply them to this conversation around mental health. And so I began my conversation with Lacey Sturm by asking her this. Lacey, I want to ask you this. When you noticed first that something wasn't quite right in your mind and in your emotions, was it triggered by a specific event? Was it something you had experienced your whole life, or did it just come all of a sudden? How did that look for you? Was it something that you had experienced for a long time?
Oh yeah, forever.
Wow.
Well, for me personally, I always had a desire to die since since my cousin's death at 10 years old.
Wow.
I always felt this wrong, like something was wrong, that he was dead and I wasn't. It was just, I think it was a gift of empathy or whatever.
Yeah.
That, you know, God gives some people, I guess, maybe a stronger gift of empathy than others. And I think that when you feel that also is a little, maybe just cultural, there might have been a little cultural codependency that just comes with poverty.
Right. Tell me about that.
You don't get your own anything. You wear each other's clothes and you share each other's food, and everything's passed on. And
wow.
So there's a little bit of that too. But I think just in empathy, just feeling like a recognition of there being something wrong in the world and there not being a solution for it.
Right.
And also me being part of the problem because there wasn't enough always. And I felt like if I wasn't around, maybe, and this sounds really like noble, but it's not really, it's a deception actually.
Yeah.
But if I wasn't around, maybe that there would be more for others.
Oh man.
So it's a noble deception. It's very untrue. You quoted a minute ago, the loaves and the fish. And then just over and over in the scriptures, you see God providing. He never's like, there's too many people.
Yeah, yeah.
He's like, if you need food, I'm going to rain it from heaven. And when Jesus was there, he was like, feed them. He's like, we don't have enough money.
Yeah, of
and
course.
he's like, well, does anybody have faith for this? Well, here's this boy. Well, here, they can have my lunch. Oh my God, how sweet. And he's like, perfect. That's all we need. One heart that believes that nobody's, too much of a burden. And so that would be willing to share. And so then he multiplied it. And he can do that. He's actually a miraculous God that can do that. And for me, what I got caught up in is this thinking that life would be better if I wasn't there, always feeling that way. And of course, I think there was just my mom was young. She was 16 when she had me, and 15 when she had my brother.
Wow.
And so, I guess by the time I was 10, she's 26, with 3 kids and another one on the way. Probably, no, when I was 10, she had 4 kids at that time. So, and really and truly, like, her just trying to make the best decisions she can.
Right.
And being frustrated at every turn, and her dealing with probably her own issues with maybe ADD or, depression or whatever. I don't know what she was going through. She can tell her own story. But I know that for her, just the circumstances themselves, and what are you going to do? What are you, like, how are you going to keep your kids in line? My mom talked to us like she never talked to us like children. She wanted us to be aware of life for real, because she knew that we could end up without her for some reason or another. She's seen death. She's seen, circumstances bring separation, and she just wanted us to be strong. Now, I don't know if that was the best, method for raising kids, but what it taught me was I need to be considerate of everybody else first. And that's a good thing to some degree, but it was twisted in my mind because I brought it to a place that was just deceiving, like life would be better without me. Well, if you actually followed that thought through, and I did in my life, it wouldn't have been better for any person at all in my family at all. They would have had the story of their sister who committed suicide, or their daughter, or their granddaughter, or whoever it is, and there's no good story that, you know what I mean? Like, for me, as a kid, thinking it would be better if it wasn't here, that was just a lie.
Yeah, complete lie. And I mean, that's a heaviness that many people don't know what to do with, or how to deal with it, or even how to process it. And then instead of getting help, it becomes this feeling and this cycle that just continues to perpetuate in an unhealthy way,
I think that's an important point too, that we don't recognize our gifts spiritually. And spiritual gifts are so core to understanding our identity and why we were wired the way we are.
Yeah.
And I think I have a spiritual gift of, like I talked about with empathy, but also to be able to feel what other people are feeling,
right?
Whether or not it's being vocalized by others.
Oh, absolutely.
You can pick up in the room what's going on. And also, I think as mystical as this sounds, I think that a lot of us are clairvoyant as a gift from God, and we don't realize we're thinking thoughts that other people are thinking. But because we actually pick it up on it, why am I thinking this? Well, actually, somebody else was thinking the same thing. And why, and there's like this whole big cycle of like, well, maybe something's wrong with me because of my thoughts.
Wow, yeah.
But really, you're just thinking about something going on where you were earlier, or where you are, the people around you that aren't telling what they're thinking. You're just picking up on it. I've seen this. I know this sounds like a lot, like that's a whole lot but it really helps me to recognize, wow, I can think something and it's not necessarily me.
Well, yeah, I think sometimes we can undervalue or put too little weight on the spiritual world that we live in, because we live in a very physical world, but it's also a very spiritual world. And when you're in a room, and I've sensed it before myself, when you're in a room and there's a lot of negativity or a lot of anger, you start to pick up on that, and you're going, man, I wasn't angry before I walked in here, but now I am, right? Or I was really down, but I walked in this room where there was so much joy, and I really picked up on that. And I think we ought to do especially when it comes to the area of these negative thoughts. And you talked about some of the negative thoughts you had about maybe this planet would be better off without me. But, we got to do what the Bible says to do, I think. And that is to take every thought captive. Does it line up to what Christ says about us? And really take every single thought under that evaluation.
Yes, and I think that is the number one thing that pulled me out after I had my encounter with God was replacing, like the second part of that, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Take every thought captive and make it obedient to Christ. So what is the right thing? And I do this with my kid, with Joshua Lewis, my oldest. He's just like me. Like I'm sorry, I don't want to minimize his distinction for myself, but he in the spiritual gifts that he has, and his empathy, and in the weird ways that he thinks hard about things, like and won't let it go, won't let the thought go, and just go straight to worst case scenario. And some things, like to be able to like, one of the rules we have in our house is no speaking foolishness, which is...
That's good.
I'm never going to be any good. I'm always going to fail. Like, all these things that he'll sometimes say when he feels overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And so when he does speak foolishness, the consequence for that, the discipline, is that he writes sentences of truth. And so what is the truth? And because this is the reason why I'm teaching him this is because it's exactly what I did when I came out of it. When I came out of those strongholds of thinking the worst things, as soon as the thought came up and I could tell it was impacting whether I had peace, whether I had joy, whether I was able to love the people around me, it was impacting me. I would go after that with the scripture. I would look up, what do you say about depression? God, what do you say about suicide? God, what do you say in the scriptures about these things? Because the scriptures actually, and this is why I just started this 12-week devotional video thing. I wanted to teach people how to go to the scriptures with the questions that they have and find the answers. And just not in a way that, because I believe the scriptures are living and breathing words of God that actually address things as they come up. It's the most mystical, powerful, beautiful thing. I didn't get to go to church when I was young in the same place all the time. I didn't have a particular person that walked me through what it means to be a Christian. I had the scriptures. That's it. And even if I did have people in my life, I wouldn't have trusted them without looking at what's your standard here? Why is the Bible the words of God? And I studied a lot of atheists that became Christians when I became a Christian, so I could know that the Bible is true. Why is it true? Why is it mystical? How is it different from every other book? And just really, if I were to walk away from God, there would be no way for me not to believe. I could walk away, but it would be me walking away from knowing that this is true. And I would never be able to say I don't believe in God. I would always have to say, well, I'm not doing that anymore. If I did ever walk away, because there's no way, from what I've seen in my life, with all of the miracles I've seen, with all of there's no way for me not to believe that in the scriptures and the power of it. It is absolutely real.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Very real. As much as I mocked it before, I've seen it way too much.
Yeah, well, even after, though, as you've progressed and grown in life and gone through new seasons, did you find that those feelings just suddenly went away when you met Jesus? Everything is now good because I've met Jesus. Or was there still a struggle, and how did you handle that differently moving forward?
Well, I did struggle with those feelings of suicide and depression after I became a Christian, but I handled the feelings differently. I handled that. Again, I didn't know always that I was picking up on other people's feelings as well, which if you realize that you're picking up on the environment around you, I believe that the resolution to that is that you pray. Right. Because the reason why God will allow you to feel it is so that you could pray from a place of compassion and He's ready to move on behalf of the prayers that are coming from you picking up those feelings. I just believe that there's like a special ability you will have to pray in an effective way because you feel it, that other people won't, that don't feel it. So there's that, which I figured out later.
Yeah, and we have that weapon, right? the weapon that we know that God's on our side and we can pray from that position of strength. And yeah, absolutely. We can pick up on those feelings and instead we can react with them differently. But I want to ask too, do you think that sometimes there's not just a sense of picking up on feelings or picking up on thoughts or mindsets, but there's also something biological at work? And have you experienced that at all?
Yeah, that's so real. I don't know why it is, but I know that the Bible says, be not drunk with wine, but be filled with the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. There's something about when we physiologically open ourselves up because of certain things, chemicals in our body that are in there or that aren't in there, that open ourselves up to being influenced by the spirit realm, darkness, more than others. And I absolutely had issues with my blood sugar. And whenever I learned to eat a better diet, my mood was completely different. And I actually healed a lot of my mood swings, like maybe like the highs and the lows being so high and so low. Yeah. Through diet. And I know that people can do that through medication. Sometimes I remember somebody I really love taking antidepressants so that he could understand what it's like to not have such a strong reaction. Because he went to zero. And he actually just thought logically about things for a season. But it taught him that so that when he was off the medicine, he remembered that maybe this isn't as a big a deal as my feelings are making me think it is. Right. because the same situation came up when I took the medicine and I felt nothing. I could just make a clear decision.
Yeah, for sure. And for me and my own personal journey, medication has definitely helped. But the other thing that's majorly helped me is professional counseling. And I say this again, professional counseling, not just sitting having coffee with your friend. And I remember when I thought about going to counseling, there was an initial reaction that I had was, okay, well, I'm not that messed up, then I need to go see a counselor, you know? And I think that's just such a lie because counseling has helped in such a huge way. Have you ever done that with either yourself or your husband, Josh?
Absolutely. My husband and I, we still are connected to a counseling group, and we go to counseling whenever we have free time, and we have but when we're going through problems, we just make time, and we don't necessarily have the money, but we we put the money there. We look for the money. We find money. Yeah. We're asking Jesus for the money because we need that so much. And the embarrassing part should never be that we go to counseling. We should be able to say that's a terrible, terrible thing that needs to change. Counseling should be a sign of wisdom. I want counsel. Whoa, how wise of you. You know what I mean? It should be like a respectable thing to do and a privilege and an honor that, you know, we have the ability. I think what's embarrassing is that we don't have community in our society in a way that we could actually receive counseling from people who are older and wiser in the capacity that we need it from people who study it professionally. You know what I mean? That is a little embarrassing that as a society, we just don't value that for some reason socially, have the relationships that I think we're meant to. Like older women are meant to teach the younger women. It says that. I mean, do we have that set up in our culture? I don't know. I don't see it. I'm seeking out older women to teach me something, and most of the time they think it's strange. I'm like, please just teach me about this. You've been married how long? Okay, I'm going to hang out with you.
Well, and there's so much wisdom in doing life with people who are a little further ahead of you, who have seen stuff. And I mean, we're not meant to walk this journey alone. But definitely as we're in community, we can't keep looking towards people to be our savior. We can encourage people and we can point them to Jesus, but we can't save them from the situation. We don't have that kind of power. But I wanted to ask you, Lacey, what would you say to the person that's listening today that's struggling with anxiety, that's struggling with depression, that might be having suicidal thoughts, self-harm, whatever it might be? What would you want to say to that person today?
First, I just want to say I would like to pray because I think to be able to pray and talk to God on behalf of somebody else, it really fills you with his love for the person you're praying for.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would like to do that, but I guess before that, just to be able to say and know that if you're breathing, there's such significance in our weight and our breath, and in the fact in life being a gift. It is a gift, and there's always hope for the worst things that we've seen being turned into something miraculous and glorious. And honestly, like with my own journey, I've seen God do the most amazing miracles and the most beautiful ways of blessing others through the worst things I've ever walked through.
Yeah.
And to be able to walk through and come out the other side and watch what he does and how it turned into something so powerful, it seems like so like far away when you're in it. But it is there on the other side. This glory that comes out of our suffering, if we can just keep walking through it. And, you know, your life is a gift and you are uniquely made. And there is something that God wants to shine in the world through you that he can't through other people the way it will shine through you. And it's so important that you let him shine through you. Mm-hmm. It is the most powerful, beautiful, at-home feeling to let God shine through you, because it's what we're made for. To be loved by him and to love him.
Yeah.
And to feel his love for others through going through us. So, can I pray?
Of course. Please pray for us.
Father, I thank you, Lord, for the way that you have created the earth and everything in it so full of glory. I thank you that you are a great artist and that your crowning work was us. And I pray that we would be able to let that sink in, Lord, that you created us on purpose, with a purpose, and it all has to do with love. So I pray right now in your name, Lord Jesus, that you would pour out your spirit and your love on all the people listening so that they would encounter you in a way that they would know that you're present with them. They would know that you're here. You're hearing everything that they are crying out. You're hearing the depths of their heart that they don't have words to express, that you're with them, that they're never going to be alone. And your word says that you draw near to the brokenhearted. So I pray specifically for those who have broken hearts, Lord, that you would draw near to them and they would know that you love them, and they would know that you have plans for all of the mess to turn it into a masterpiece of glory and purpose and redemption. So God, I just ask that you would take these words that we've spoken here today, and you would use them how you want, and you would fill them with your spirit, and you would cover them with your grace so that people would hear only what you want to. And if we said anything you don't want them to hear, I pray they wouldn't hear that. And I just thank you that you love us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Wow, what an incredible conversation that was with Lacey Sturm. Thanks so much for coming on the show today, coming on the Overflow Beyond the Music podcast. And I just thought it would be really good. We've talked about some heavy stuff today, but we want to leave you with some resources that would help you. This is not by any means counselor's advice. This is just some resources for you to check out on your own. And so I've asked Brett Allman to stick around. And Brett, could you share a couple resources with us today that would really help follow up this conversation?
For sure. First, just thanks. I just love hearing other stories of people who are journeying similar things. It's not like misery likes company, but it's just, again, it's just to know you're not alone. My website is just my name. It's just brettallman.com, and I'm assuming you can drop that in the show notes. If you go on the website and you click it's just a blog. If you click on mental health, you'll get 3 years of mental health articles that I post. So I read about 300, I think I'm at 311 blogs a week right now.
Wow.
And people always think it's a lot. They all go into Feedly, and I read them in 20 minutes. But I just post the best stuff I can find. And it's both mainstream. Like, you'll get articles from Huffington Post and other places, and faith-based things as well. I do have a number of books. I have a few on media, but I wrote a book called Your Story, The Wounding Embrace with a pastor and a psychologist, and it was written before my breakdown. And you can get that off Kindle, off Amazon. And I wrote a free ebook. If you go to my thebreadalmond.com, it's called Reset. This is just my breakdown put in book form, which sounds a little weird. But someone just said to me, a publisher just said, would you mind writing out your breakdown in book form? And I said, why? And they said, because I've never heard a Christian's perspective on it before. So I wrote my journey, and there's 17 or 18 other people. Carrie Newhoff wrote his, and a few other people wrote their journeys. It's just a free ebook. And I have put up a YouTube channel where, like, I'm doing a lot of stuff for parents these days. And so I'm kind of talking to parents, like, what do you do if your kid's having a panic attack? Or, what is the best medication for mental health? I'm kind of making a joke about that. It should actually be exercise there. But I'm finding people are going to it, not as parents. Even teenagers are going to it. So it's just, if you just search for my name in YouTube, I think it's actually youtube.com/BrettU, BRETTU. But recently I just put up, I had a week where I had 7 suicides that I heard of in 7 days.
Wow.
And so I have a full, like everything I'm talking about today, it's just bits and pieces of a talk that I've researched and been speaking for 7 years. I've read about 240 books on mental health. I'm just taking the best of everything. And I wrote a talk. It's called The Walking Wounded. But after hearing, like, I'm selling this as I travel and online, but after hearing all these suicides, I just said, I can't hold something back like this. So I posted the whole talk on YouTube. So if you're listening to this and you're struggling, or if you just want some more info, if you go on my channel, if you just search The Walking Wounded, you'll find my full presentation with all the slides and everything all on it. And hopefully that can be something just to kind of be that spark under you to kind of, step out, start sharing your journey, and then start walking down that body, mind, and soul analogy as you journey towards, like, hope, healing, redemption, rescue, healing, wholeness, call it anything you want.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Brett, for that. I appreciate that. We will make sure to put all of those links in our show notes. This wraps up this episode of the Overflow Beyond the Music podcast. I'm your host, Josh McCabe. Join us again. We're going to be coming back with some more great guests. We're going to be continuing this subject on our next episode. We're going to have Brian Johnson from Bethel Music, We Are Messengers, and a few other things as well. So make sure you stick with us. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for joining us.